The Fantasmagorium is proud to present Money, Murder, and Minnesota, a retrospective and review of all things Fargo. With Rye all ground up and everyone looking for the runt, things are getting pretty messy for the Blumquists and the Gerhards. Hansy and Mike Milligan have a doozy of a missing person to solve, while Lou is doing the good work that only a Solverson can do. The award-winning Coen Brothers executive-produced and Noah Hawley run FX series of Fargo is what we are here for, so let's go. Kat is here, I am Scotty R37, and Steve is probably going to miss out on them space-age typewriters. How you doing, Kat?
Good.
Excellent. So I rewatched, because we were supposed to do this last week. Apologies to anybody who missed it. But we are back this week, and I rewatched, so I've seen these episodes twice. Not a whole heck of a lot goes on, a lot of tension, great performances, but sort of plot thin.
True. But the tension is very high.
And Patrick Wilson is doing a bang-up job. Bokeem Woodbine is knocking it out of the park. I just love the cast. Everyone's doing great.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Jeffrey Donovan as Dodd?
Yeah.
Yeah. Super jazzed about him, too. I like how they're using the flashbacks and such, but it's much more of a performing, getting the tension, the lay of the land, and almost like setting up the chess pieces that we sort of saw in season 4.
Yeah, well, this one, I think the story is more like clear. There doesn't seem to be as many plot threads, like you mentioned. Hansi and Mike Milton, the Kansas City, they're all trying to find Rye and Lou and Hank. So they're all trying to do the same thing, so you can keep focused more on what's going on rather than season 4 where everybody's kind of doing their own thing.
True. But still, like it was, as these are interweaving and everybody is sort of focused on Rye because of the murder of the judge, there is a focal point that everyone sort of orbits as opposed to just a town doing whatever it wants. You're correct. I couldn't agree with you more. So it does, how does the first episode 3 start?
Starts with Hansi finding a white rabbit in the snow, and we have a flashback to when he's in one of those horrible Indian schools where they try and, purge your culture and your language from you and all that. And there's this guy in there, a magician, showing him how he's pulling a rabbit out of a hat. And little boy Hansi's just kind of looking at it, doesn't seem to be too enamored with it or whatever. And he's thinking about that while he has captured this rabbit that he's holding in his hand and petting it. And then it cuts to him having unceremoniously just snapped at the cute little rabbit's neck. And Walking Him, Mizuzaki plays as the song as he's on his way back to the farm.
And at that point, when he's going to the farm, it's basically they talk to Dodd's daughter. I forget her name. And
he's already plucked the rabbit of all its hair, and he's talking to her, and she's like, "Oh, I don't know nothing." And then he's like, gives her the look. Hansi just knows. And she's like, "Okay, maybe I know something," and decides to try and help out with it.
Right. And so they end up heading towards Rye's apartment they're in Fargo right now. This is all taking place in Fargo. Yeah. Which is
the Gerhardt family is outside the outskirts of Fargo. Right. And meanwhile, while they're heading to Rye's apartment and waiting for their lead, Lou decides to take a road trip up to Fargo. And of course, he's a Minnesota state trooper, so he has to go to the courthouse when he gets there. And he meets our old pal, Ben Schmidt, who we remember was Gus Grimley's boss in the first season. And old man Lou did not have very nice things to say about Ben. And we can see why watching this. Because it's funny, because in the first season, it's like I could see why I didn't think Gus's boss was that bad, because he's like, you pulled a guy over and you ran and you didn't run his plates. You saw the car, you knew the car was stolen and you let him go. It's like, he didn't seem to be that much of an idiot. But in this season, it's like Lou is just sizing him up everywhere they go. And it's like, okay, it's either that Ben's really stupid or he's pretending to be stupid and he's actually afraid. Maybe it's both. Because he tells Lou point blank that if you got a murder involving a judge and a Gerhardt, it's better that you just confess and go to prison and, live out the rest of your days there rather than get involved. He's like, well, what are you saying? He's like, well, say it'd be better if it was your own prints found in the gun instead of Rye's. Which he also notifies Hank about, that they got to worry about the Gerhardt family, who Hank tells them, or Hank and Lou realize are they're in charge of distribution and trucking out of Fargo, which, as we know from season 1, one of their outlets in Bemidji was run by, Sam Hess as one of the truckers in question. So the Gerhardts are the ones who were in charge of that operation. And we get a flashback of how when Otto was a boy, his father takes him to the movie theater and they're watching, and there's these other gangsters giving him shit. And then it's little Otto sitting with his popcorn in the row right behind the bad guy who knifes him in the neck, which I thought was like, oh, geez. And he's watching a sci-fi, UFO type show, which is another theme that we see through these episodes and through this season.
Oh, yes. The strange happenings.
Yes.
They come around this time of year.
So Ben, while Ben and Lou are there at the courthouse, we see Skip Sprang, the typewriter guy, show up, trying to get into the judge's office and banging on the door. He's not getting an answer. He leaves. And Lou notes the guy's acting kind of squirrely, so they go out to question him by the car. And even though he's being really cagey, and Lou kind of advises, you might want to bring him in. And Ben's like, no. And you could tell that it's because Ben just doesn't want to get involved, because he knows the Gerhardts are involved. And he's like, I just don't want to get involved in this. And Lou's like, okay. And they let him go. And Skip decides to go to Rye's apartment, and he's banging on the door. He's like, Rye. And then Dodd's daughter answers instead, and she invites him in, and then he sees Hansi. She's like, oh, don't worry about him. He's boring. And then they
they basically go for a drive, because he says that he's going to, he was there to pay back money. And it's like, but you don't have the money? It sounds like we're going for a drive. And this doesn't turn out well, but
no, it doesn't. But in the meantime, Ben and Lou show up at the Gerhardt family farm, and they get out, and all the goons are there and order Lou to give up his gun. And Lou's like, am I the only one who's familiar with the concept of law enforcement? And Floyd comes out, and she's like, well, what's this about? And he says, well, we got a dead judge and 2 others. I got the gun, and your son's prints have shown up on the gun, and I'm pretty sure that this is probably not the first time you've heard something like that. And she's like, well, we got nothing to say about it. And you're not talking to Rye. That's not going to happen. So she implies that Rye isn't missing, because she's like, oh, that's not happening. You're not talking to him. And Ben tries to, quell the situation, and Dodd shows up and gets even angry. There's a problem here, Mom. It's like, yeah, we got this settled. And Dodd gets pissed off at Ben, and you could tell that they clearly have affiliations. But Lou is like, well, I'm the one you should be mad at.
Yeah.
And Bear's just standing there like it's a nonchalant thing, like chewing on like whatever he's eating, a snack. He's not even really bothered by any of this.
Right.
Which I like about it. Like about him.
Oh, the family dynamics are great. Just the way that Dodd treats his brother, like the whole, and Floyd. And the respect. There's a touching moment in the 4th episode after when Dodd had lost it in front of Brad Garrett and was just trying to cuddle with his mom. And I thought that was sort of weird, but touching, in a weird way.
Yeah. And speaking of family dynamics, after Ben and Lou leave, Bear's son is talking about how, Dad, these Kansas City guys don't seem like the type who, want to buy half a car. And he's like, don't you worry about that. You're going back to school tomorrow. And she's like, I don't want to go. He's like, Grandma says so, and that's what we're doing. He's like, but Uncle Dodd says, like, you shut up. Dodd's got his girls, but you're mine. You're going to do what I say. And you can tell from the way Bear's saying that it's more about that Bear knows that Dodd is kind of an idiot, and he doesn't want his son to fall under Dodd's influence.
Right.
But despite his best efforts, Dodd takes Bear's son for a ride, and Bear's son implies that he can shoot. And he's like, well, what are you going to do to reload? Because he's got the cerebral palsy. He can't with his hands. He's like, pull over, I'll show you. So he does a pretty good job showing how he can shoot the gun and all. He's like, thanks. So then they go to a diner and go to intimidate some of the Kansas City guys who were there with Joe Bluo for the, for the back and forth, meetings.
Negotiations.
Yeah, and so they kind of beat him up at the donut shop. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is something strangely that the kid is excited to be a part of, even though it wasn't really the best idea.
Well, and he does say to Barry that he wants, like, he is something already. He's Gerhard, and he wants to be part of the family business, but people won't let him. And they say, you got to use your brain. He's going to be a lawyer or something. And he wants to bust heads. And so that's why Dodd was supposed to take him to school.
Yeah.
Dodd took him on a job. And so it is kind of, interesting dynamic again, but that's also presented when we meet up with Skip again, and Dodd says that all he wanted was a boy, and what did God give him? 4 girls. So he's angry about that,
and that's what we see has happened to Skip. They take him to the dig site because Hansi has since called Dodd to tell him that it's important, and they get there and they put him in this pit in the dark, and they're trying to get him to talk, and it's clear that Skip doesn't know anything. And he's like, what about Mike Milligan? Mike Milligan might have him. And Dodd's like, nah, you don't know shit. And so then he signals, and the dump truck pours all the hot asphalt on him and entombs him alive, which is pretty horrifying. And Dodd's daughter is like, Dad, I helped you do this. This should be my credit. And he just slaps her across the face because he just doesn't want to hear it from her. Like you mentioned, he preferred to have sons instead he had daughters.
Yeah. But and that's what okay, so then we kill Skip. What's after that?
So well, that was also at the end of episode 3, but I'm kind of jumping around because it's easier to remember.
Right. Oh, no, you're right. That's why I can't think of anything happening after that, because it was the end of episode 3. Great.
But also what happens is Hank even mentioned, or not Hank, but Lou even mentioned to Floyd when they had that standoff at the Gerhardt farm.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of Mike Milligan? And they might be a part of it. And she kind of has a reaction, but tries to hide it. And so she's worried because now they're onto it. And, what are we going to do about that? And she has to go meet the Kansas City guys again. And they have a meeting, and she proposes a counter proposal where we'll sell you like 20% of the business. We'll be in a partnership. We'll give you 25% discount for the first 5 years. But the point is, we're not selling it. We're going to be, running it. It'll be a partnership. And he's like, well, I'll give you time to consider the counteroffer. And he's like, sorry, the boss has rejected the counteroffer, and now we're lowering our asking price by $2 million. And she's like, look, you may think I'm just some shrill old woman, but I'm not. And she gives this great speech about how tough she is and everything like that. And he's like, well, sir, he's like, well, ma'am, if it was up to me, the Brad Garrett character, he's like, I would totally accept that deal right now. But he's like, it's not up to me. And I'm sorry I couldn't have met your husband. He sounds like a great guy. She's like, oh, no, he would have killed you the moment you showed up. You'd be grateful you're talking to me. And he's like, okay, I'm glad for that then. But while this is happening, he tells her, about this piece. Your son there attacked my guys here this morning while they're involved in the appropriation of donuts. And he's like, I don't think you keep saying your sons will abide by this deal if you agree to it, but I don't think so. They're not going to. And that's when Dodd loses his temper, and Bear has to drag him out of the room. And he's like, ma'am, if one of my guys screws up like that or jeopardizes the deal, I take his arm. Talks out of turn, I take his tongue. But you deal with a family, and that's the problem with a family business. What are you going to do to your kids, your grandkids? And she finally shows trepidation in the interview because she knows what he's getting at. And she's like, I'll deal with him. And she's like, we don't want all-out war. And he's like, anything other than unconditional surrender, and we will wipe out every last Gerhardt on the face of the earth. And he leaves. And that's when she drives back from the meeting, and Dodd is kind of, sad with her. And I get that Dodd's secretly happy because he's been advocating going to war from the start. And she even had a meeting where she was giving some of their allies, like, tea and biscuits and asking them if they would go to war with them. And they're like, well, if they fire the first shots, we'll do it. But otherwise, we won't. Right. So, it's funny that as much of an idiot that Dodd is, he's actually right that he's been right from the start that this Kansas City thing, you can't, you have to go all out war with these people. It's not going to, no, you can't.
Yeah. And that is something that I sorry. Yeah, that's something that I sort of, I was prepared for that because of season 4 and because of the way that they had sort of established how the Kansas City Mafia does their business. So I've always known that the Kansas City Mafia, like, maybe I have a higher fear of the Kansas City Mafia because I know the origin story. I saw the prequel before I saw this. So chronologically, I understand what they're actually dealing with, which is interesting. So, but I don't think Dodd would win. So when Dodd sort of says that he's a hothead, I don't, or says that he's correct in terms of just going to all out war, they wouldn't win. Like, I don't think this isn't going to end well for the Gerhardts. I don't think this season. That's my prediction. I think everything's going to be fine with the Kansas City Mafia. They'll be great. Maybe Mike Milligan will die. I don't know.
Oh, it's kind of like it's like, on the one hand, you believe Floyd when she says, "We will fight to the last man."
Yes.
But as dumb as Dodd is and as violent, you wonder what they got, because they got a few good. You got Bear, who's kind of trying to present himself as kind of an innocent guy, but he's named Bear, so we'll see what comes of that. And we have Hansi, who's obviously really intelligent, and that leads us into yes, and that leads us into our next storyline, in which, when Lou is leaving Fargo, satisfied that Ben Schmidt is either on the payroll of the Gerhardts or is too afraid to do anything about it, he's like, "Well, we'll get a judge to get a warrant." And he's like, "Well, what judge is going to give you a search warrant for the Gerhardt farm around here? You heard them; they own half the town." And so he just gets out of the car because he notices that they're driving by Skip's shop, the typewriter shop. And he goes in there, and Lou goes in there alone and meets Mike Milligan and the Kitchen Brothers, who are, tossing the place. And Mike is like, "Oh, hi," and being all, friendly. And Lou's like, "Well, we're a real friendly people here in Minnesota." And he's like, "No, you're not. You actually really are very unfriendly people. Like your old friend Hank there, I already met him. And you just like to hide it real well by being extra polite." Which I have a friend in Minnesota who confirms that's absolutely true. He says the Minnesota nice thing is he says the accents are exaggerated in the show, but that the Minnesota nice thing is very real. And like you mentioned on last week's episode, Mike has a point, because he was treated like he was in a sundown town, where Hank is basically pulling him over for the crime of driving by the Waffle Hut without getting out of the car or anything, just looking at it and basically trying to run him out of town because of, racism. And so Mike is like, "Yeah, you're not really a nice guy or anything." And Lou, he's like, "Do you know where Skip is?" And Lou's like, "I was about to ask you the same question." And he's like, "Okay." So Mike doesn't see a reason to escalate the situation, so he decides to leave. He's like, "How did Nixon say it? I am not a crook." As he does and he does that, like you mentioned, that weird Malvo type way that he has of talking, where he's like not intimidated or fazed by anything. And then he and the Kitchen Brothers just, leave in peace.
Well, this time, yeah. There is, and we'll get to the Kitchen Brothers slaughtering Otto's caregivers with Mike late. Well, let's do it now. Let's talk about that, because that was pretty bitchin' when we do have the Kitchen Brothers and Mike Milligan. We've Mike ends up banging Dodd's daughter,
which is interesting. It's like they never established how or when exactly they met, or if she's trying to do some type of power play. She just, it's like, "Oh, you're having like this fling with Mike Milligan." And she mentions the thing about the finger in the ass, which Malvo mentions in season 1 when he's undercover in Kansas City. And you could tell Mike is disturbed by that, because he keeps bringing it up. And she's like, "I thought we were going to have fun." And he's like, "Well, I would, but I still feel like your finger's in my ass." She's like, "It was my thumb." It's like,
I think, maybe it is because it's Fargo, and Dodd's daughter, I still forget her name. Probably she wanted coke.
That's true.
But and so she probably asked the black guy.
But he's not there dealing drugs. He's there as an enforcer for Kansas City.
No, I know. But like, as you said, in terms of the sundown town, maybe it's racism. Sometimes there's advantageous in the 70s in Fargo.
Well, she does mention how she wishes things were back like the way they were in the 60s, like the flower child and all that kind of stuff. And And then he tells her what became of all those flower children afterwards, working these dead-end jobs they hate with wife-beater husbands. And she's like, well, at least I would have had fun. And he mentions at some point that, you know, if your mom doesn't take the deal, or even if they do, your dad's going to be a problem, and we might have to kill him. And she's like, okay. And
yeah, you have no problem with that.
We get why she doesn't care, because Dodd's like a chauvinist asshole. But Mike's like, oh, yeah, he's kind of surprised by that. Like, it's not a big deal. And she mentions how they're out of town taking care of, that they took Otto to the doctor. He's like, doesn't Otto have a say in this? She's like, nah, they took him to a place to figure out if they can help him stop drooling. He's like, oh, cool, what doctor? And that's where they go and ambush Otto's entourage outside the clinic. And
Lemon pie with the win. Simone is her name.
Yes, she was motivated by the fact she was treated like crap. I was just wondering how she came upon Mike Milligan. She was just probably smart enough for it to find him.
Yeah.
And Mike, surprisingly, after killing Otto's whole entourage, leaves Otto unscathed. He kind of walks up and says, hi. You know, like, it's basically sending a message. Whereas, you know, Floyd's position was that, oh, we've been a peacekeeping family since Kennedy, and their allies are like, I'm sick and tired of this Jimmy Carter crap. He's sitting around doing jack shit, and I gotta wait in line for gasoline. And speaking of which, Lou goes to the gas station, and he sees this guy talking about strange lights in the sky, and how it's messing up everything, and all the cheating, and causing all the problems. And Lou's like, yeah, I was wondering what was responsible for that. Just to get away from the local people. And he's still in line, but he just gets back in the car anyway because he doesn't want to keep talking with this guy.
Yeah. No, but it is strange to have that the UFO be a recurring sort of presence or happening. Like, I don't even know if it is a UFO. I don't even know if we'll ever find out. I don't think that thing is going to land. Not that kind of show.
Yeah, and so let's see what else is there. Oh, right. So on the other side of things, Floyd finally decides, after hearing about what happened to Otto, that it's war. And Dodd is happy to hear this because everybody's gathered at the house for it. So that means that the next episode's probably going to get some action pretty soon. But the other storyline that was going on these two episodes is Ed and Peggy decide that they need to account for the damage to the car. So they take it out onto the ice and they're going to crash it into a tree. But because of the black ice, the car spins out and they hit the rear tail light instead. So then Ed tries again, and this time he gets a tree branch to hit it. And if you think about it logically, like, it doesn't work, but they figure, oh, that'll cover for it. And they send the car to the station or to the auto shop. And Peggy takes the bus for a while, and she gets to work where, with her little fantasy about, you know, this course and about being a better woman and all this stuff, she tells her friend that, oh, I'm going to make the $500 deposit for this Spring of Life or you know, whatever. Well,
some seminar
the weird seminar. And
sounds
Lou's
like a retreat
there. And yeah, and Lou's wife is there wondering if her hair is going to fall out. And the hairdresser tells her, oh, well, not necessarily. Not everybody who gets chemo has that happen. And they're doing their hair and stuff. And suddenly Hank comes in and he asks permission to put a wanted sign for Rye Gerhardt on the wall. And he floats his theory. And he's like, yeah, we think Rye Gerhardt. Yeah, we think he's the guy who killed the people at the Waffle Hut. And he's talking about the circuit. And because Lou's wife, of course, had been there and found the gun. And now that there's glass in the road, Hank mentions, she puts two and two together. She's like, well, if the shooter left his car behind and you have glass in the road and the gun doesn't look like it was deposited, like it fell, like maybe he got hit by a hit and run. And he's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And then Peggy's like petrified listening to this. And she's like, no, that really doesn't make any sense. Well, what would you do? Just hit the guy and not call the police and just go home? And Hank's like, yeah, I got to agree with Peggy. Like, what would you do? Just hit a guy and drive home and cook dinner? Like, nothing's wrong.
Which is exactly what happened.
It's exactly what happened. And Peggy just turns her back to them so they can't see that she's looking nervous as all hell about this. And so she's like really kind of spooked about it. Ed, meanwhile, has his own problems because he's at the butcher shop and his boss tells him that he got an offer on the shop from some guy in Florida or whatever, or some other local guy because he wants to move to Florida. And he's like, well, if you make the deposit, five, or however much it was, he's like, oh, I can help with that. And so Ed goes down to the beauty shop, the hairdresser, to talk to Peggy. And he's like, Peggy, we're going to need the money for the deposit on the butcher shop because, this is our future. And she's like, well, I already spent the money on, the seminar. And he's like, hun, we need to get the money back. You got to tell him you're sorry or you can't do it. This is our future and everything's riding on it. And he tries to make her feel better about it at one point by telling her that, oh, I don't think I'd be able to handle a greater version of you. You're great enough already. And again, Ed is a very simple guy. He's just thinking long term. And she's still living in her, she's still living in La La Land. Like, we're going to go, trying to find a way out of what she thinks is potentially a boring marriage. So she goes back in and asks the hairdresser if she can get the deposit back. And she's like, well, Peggy, most of that was your own money from this job. You shouldn't have to cave to Ed's demands and Ed's desires, even though Ed is thinking about both of their futures long term.
Right.
And she's like,
so
oh,
she's
Ed
convinced.
says it. Yeah, and she's like, oh, well, Ed says this and Ed says that. And she's like, you need to worry about yourself. And it's like, oh, geez, this hairdresser. Yeah, one of the.
I don't know. It seems era appropriate to have that like bra burning feminist hairdresser owner. Like it's.
Oh, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally. I think it's an interesting character because it's like there is a certain level of selfishness to what's going on, and it's very. I enjoy the dynamic. It raises questions, and through characters, it's great.
Yeah, and that's certainly why you have the bit where the Gerhardt ally mentioned Jimmy Carter and how he's fed up with him. And you have the scene at the gas station, and then the allusions to UFOs. Yeah, it's not important that Peggy report a vehicular homicide. What's important is her finding herself in that seminar.
Exactly.
Exactly. I mean, the only way that what Peggy did would make any sense is if she had recognized that was Rye Gerhardt and was afraid that they wouldn't be forgiving, even if it was an accident. But she clearly had no idea who it was. So she's just completely, like, she's out there.
I just think that she has the mentality of a child.
Yeah.
She wants what she wants. And it is true. It's a boring marriage, I guess, but it's all Ed wants. Ed just wants to have his butcher shop and make babies with Peggy. And the future will work itself out. It'll be fun. It'll be fun.
That's right.
Have to get a bigger house.
They would need another house with a yard if they wanted kids and a dog and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And to the hair, I mean, admittedly, as annoying as a hairdresser is, she did make a valid point that some of this money that they're spending is Peggy's money from the hairdresser. So it's like, okay. But again, like we talked about last time, I feel that Peggy has kind of got caught up in the fantasy of marriage and didn't really think about the reality, a lot of people do on their first marriages. Whereas Ed is a much more simple guy. Like, he literally has that, like, a painting of a steer grazing in the grass above his fireplace, prominently displayed. It's like, and that's who Ed is.
Pretty much.
As low as they come. But that matters get complicated when Floyd sends Hansi on a road trip to go find what happened to Rye, and he's driving through. He goes to check out the Waffle Hut, and because it's a small town, there's no security or locks any of the doors, so he just walks in there, and he sees all the blood. He finds the glass outside in the road, and he looks up and he sees the weird lights. I was like, is he seeing it? Like, what's going on? And from there he goes to town because he's smart. He's already piecing together what's going on here. He goes to the auto shop. He finds Ed's car, and he immediately starts looking around and getting in the dashboard. And the mechanic comes out to, be super dim-witted guy comes out. He's like, hey, they called me Charlie the Mad Dog in Vietnam. It's like, no. and Hansi's just looking at this guy like, no. And he pulls out a knife or a razor, and he's like, hey, now we don't want trouble or anything. And Hansi just kind of asked him, so you were in It's almost like he thought he was lying the first time. He's like, yeah. And Hansi's like, do you miss it? It's like, miss what? The wet, the heat, the bugs, the food, and all that. And he's like, no, not at all. He's like, yeah. And Hansi's like, yeah, coming back from all that to this frozen winter, this eternal frozen winter and the quiet. It's like, I can't stand the quiet, which is kind of alluding to what Lou was talking about with Hank in the last episode, where Hank's like, you guys took that war home with you. Whereas, and Hansi's kind of dealing with that too. And he says, yeah, I always had to clear the foxholes. Send the Indian. They say, oh, Hansi will take care of it and shit. And things are getting tense. And then the mechanic is like, well, I can't disagree with you on any of that. And suddenly, when things are about to get a little tense, Carl comes out of the bathroom, who's basically the stand-in John Goodman character from Big Lebowski. And I wish he had heard everything Hansi had just said about Vietnam, but he didn't.
Yeah. And, that's true. I was getting strong Goodman vibes.
So he comes out. He's like, "Is there a problem?" He's like, "He's got a knife, Carl." He's like, "Yeah, I can see that." And he's like, "Do we have a problem here?" And Hansi doesn't say nothing, and he pulls his jacket back, showing he's got his gun. He's like, "I said, do we have a problem here?" And so Hansi leaves. He's like, "Man, he was checking out Ed's car." He's like, "Well, I could see that. Is there anything else you could tell me?" And he's like, "I think he was an Indian." He just rolls his eyes. He's like, "You better call, bring it," whatever the phrase he says.
"You'd better call the local constable."
That's right. He's like, "Huh? The sheriff."
The sheriff, you idiot.
So Lou and Hank come over, and he tells them that, yeah, he was checking out Ed's car. And he's like, "Oh, Ed Killian?" He's like, "No, Ed from the butcher shop.
Blomquist.
Ed Blomquist." And Lou suddenly has a flashback to the night in question, when he went to the butcher shop and he noticed that Ed has been acting rather strangely. And he looks at the car and he's like, "Oh, dents in the car, huh? Like committing a hit and run of the man who murdered everybody at the Waffle Hut." And Carl's listening intently, whereas the mechanic is kind of weirded out, and Hank's like, "No, it happened up in Duluth. Ed got in a little crash. Tree branch went right through the window. Peggy luckily survived." And he's like, and Lou's just kind of looking it over, and he's like, "Did he hit the tree on his way out?" Because he sees that the tail light is out. And Ed's like, "Oh, well, Peggy said she nicked the garage door, but I did find some wood chips back there." Not saying she's lying, but and of course Lou's smart, so he's already pieced everything together. And so he decides to go straight to Ed and Peggy's house. Hansi, meanwhile, drives through town after having looked at the car, and he actually drives past Ed and Peggy and looks at Ed, and Ed kind of looks at him, and he's kind of noticing. And so Ed gets to the house first. Or not Ed, but Hansi.
Hansi gets there.
So Hansi goes inside and he looks around. Like you said it in the first episode, that belt buckle is going to come back, and Hansi has found the belt buckle in the fireplace and checks out the garage, and there's no car. So he's pretty much figured out what has happened, and he leaves just as Lou has shown up. Again, the second No Country for Old Men reference in this episode. The first being when Lou showed up at Skip's typewriter shop, and we see the lock has been blown out.
That blown out lock. Yeah, I thought that was
the blown out lock. And in this case, it's Hansi just kind of magically disappears, sitting out of the room while the sheriff was like knocking on the door. But nobody's home, so Lou just sits there and waits for Ed and Peggy to show up. And he's like, "You need to invite me in, Ed." He's like, "Okay." So they sit down and they're talking. And he's like, "Look, I can help you. Anything that happened, you could just tell me now. It's going to get worse." And Ed gets really close to finally sussing up to everything, or fessing up to everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking at the portrait over the fireplace and realizing that, yeah, he's right. We're in over our heads. He's a cop. He'll help us. And then Peggy is the one who stupidly intervenes because maybe she's worried about repercussions, contrary to what Lou is saying. I'm not quite sure.
I think Lemon hit the nail on the head specifically, that it doesn't matter what happens. What matters is that she gets to that damn seminar. All of this is going to disrupt her plans of getting to be a better woman. She has to go to that seminar.
And she seems to think that this seminar is going to magically solve all these problems. And it's like,
yes.
So then she's like, "Yeah, we're asking you to leave." And he's like, "Is that true, Ed? Are you asking me to leave?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then as Lou is going out, he stops being so nice about it. He's like, "You know what? These Gerhardts are kind of, gangsters, murderous guys, so you better lock your door." And he's not really kind about it when he says it, and he leaves. Meanwhile, we have the other a bit where Lou's wife is introduced to a cancer treatment trial where you might get the real pill or you might get the placebo. and she signs up for it 'cause she didn't think there was, much else about it. And that's something that Carl got upset about. He's like, how's she doing? Oh, the trial. We're going to start up with a trial or whatever. He's like, oh, God, So yeah, these 2 episodes didn't really accomplish much. I think the big accomplishment is that we know that Hansi will report back that he has figured out essentially what has happened to Rye. Even if he hasn't found the body, he's like, he knows what happened. And it is now going to be war between them and Kansas City.
Yes. And yeah. And Lou is also, on to it as well.
Oh yeah, Lou's 100% on it. But
and I love Patrick Wilson is doing such a great job as a protagonist, as our hero, doing a great job as Lou. I like the connection to season 1 with Molly and her mom, who will not be around for season 1. So I know what happens with the trial. But yeah,
maybe.
Yeah,
there's 27 years between the 2 seasons, so maybe she makes it and there's a remission. I don't know.
That's true.
But I noticed also the lady who works at the butcher shop at the counter, she was reading The Myth of Sisyphus, which of course is the stamp that Emmett Stussy has in season 3, and it's also the name of the 3rd episode of this series, The Myth of Sisyphus. So she's reading that in the butcher shop, and it's kind of like, in a sense, it's an analogy of Ed's whole life and what he expects of his life. He's very much in the doldrums, doing the same day in, day out. Same with the Gerhardt family. They just want to keep doing the same thing, same family-run business or whatever. And kind of like Mike says, the 70s were inevitable. It was coming. All this change, whether we wanted it to or not. And it's a continuation of the theme of the whole waiting for Dutch thing. Like the family, we're tired of Jimmy Carter, we're tired of this and that, waiting for all that kind of stuff. And you're seeing how this is kind of the winds of change, if you will, are catching up to that. And Molly, meanwhile, was watching some old war movie called Eagle's Nest, which I would note for perhaps relevance later on. But
okay.
But that was something else. So yeah, it's like the show is referencing a lot of 70s stuff, but it does it in a way that makes it feel authentic. Like it doesn't. Like we're not really sure what these lights are in the sky. Like I think it's more of a hysteria thing, because when the first major UFO sighting happened, June 18th, 1947, it was a pilot flying in Washington State. He saw what he described as 7 flying saucers chasing him. And after that, suddenly everybody was seeing him everywhere. So it's clearly like a hysteria type of issue. So in the 60s, when you had Project Blue Book, and the 70s, with all the cynicism towards the government, and it was the early 70s when Roswell was dredged back up, because that was only a local story when it first happened, and then it got dredged up back in the 70s. So it's like, are these people actually seeing lights, or is it because of the culture that they're just prone to thinking, oh, it must be a UFO, or it must be aliens, or is that it's not necessarily what's going on,
I don't think it's. I really hope that they never explain it. Kind of like, well, they did explain the ghost that was chasing Ethelreda, but.
Well, they explained their belief as to what the ghost was, but it could be anything. That felt, frankly, like a weird obligatory thing they felt to do, because it's like, oh, there's something supernatural in each of these seasons. We should throw that in there. It's like, do we really need that? It's like, no.
Do we need that? Yeah. But I don't know. I wonder if there will be a satisfying explanation, or if it will be left an unsolved mystery.
Yeah,
that would be my preference, is that there's one last flash of light and it zooms off and it's like E.T.'s rainbow, and then it's over and okay, we're good.
Yeah, but these 2 episodes were primarily concerned with. They had limited amount of scenes, but they were really great scenes because they had a lot of tension baked in. So they spent a lot of time on each of the scenes that you got to see, which was really cool. And one of the reasons why season 2 is often rated as among the best seasons, because it's not just spewing one thing from plot related to another. It actually has good characters, great tension, and a lot of great themes and references, stuff like that. And it's a more of a family crime saga that people can get behind, as opposed to season 4. I find the characters in this season more compelling than season 4 so far. Like, I'm a lot more invested. Like, as delusional as Peggy is, and as dumb as dimwit as Ed is, I'm much more invested in finding out what happens to them than with Loy Cannon and them in season 4. It's like, okay, maybe they'll make it, maybe they won't, whatever, Like these characters I just find a lot more interesting, especially Jean Smart. She's great as Floyd Gerhardt. Like that is just another, and Zahn McLaren as Hansi, another great performance there too.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I just find that season 2 I'm much more invested in the characters than in a lot of the other seasons.
Well, but again, like suits and smoking are my jam. And so season 4 had a more aesthetic, like I enjoy this because it takes place in Fargo. Finally, we've got something that's going on in Fargo. And so that's cool. We still get Minnesota, but like, and everything about it is feeling very Fargo. I kind of wish I had done, well, I wish I still had season 1 fresher in my head to be able to sort of connect more dots between this and season 1.
There is another major dot to connect with season 1.
Okay.
That, as we know, the Gerhardts operate out on the outskirts of Fargo.
Right.
And they run the distribution outside of Fargo. Well, in season 1, Sam Hess worked for the Fargo crime syndicate, not the Kansas City mob.
Oh, that's true.
So that's not to say that the Kansas City mob won't succeed, because these things morph over time. Like we mentioned in season 4, the Italians came out on top, but in this season, that doesn't feel it's clearly not an Italian family-run crime thing anymore. It's more corporate. So who knows? Will the Gerhardts make it, or is it going to be something else? But we do know that there is a Fargo crime syndicate in season 1.
Eugene Bird, thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure to see you and welcome. Well, that's all the time we have for today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just kidding. But I do wish I had a little bit more of that fresh in my head, but I have so many other sort of Fargos in me.
Well, we did remember Malvo's weird sex peeve.
I forgot. Is it still here? No. Anyway. Sorry, I'm just pressing buttons.
No, that's fine. Yeah, check the comments if there's any.
There we go. Lemon Pie says Eugene donates to the Fargo Donut Shop fund.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Eugene Bird. And that was a nice touch. It was like I'd like a chocolate glazed, and you'd like an old fashioned. An old fashioned. All right, sure. I thought the little character stuff is cool. I like, and again, Bokeem Woodbine is very charismatic as Mike Milligan. I like him too much as a bad guy. Mm-hmm. Brad Garrett is also doing really, really well.
Yeah,
with his brief screen time. But no, I am enjoying it with these 2 episodes.
There's something else that I thought was funny. The Carl character, Nick Offerman.
Yes.
You know what his character's last name is? Weathers.
No way.
Except Carl with a K instead of a C, but he's Carl Weathers.
That's amazing.
It is.
But yeah, looking forward to it. And I just remembered that this season is going to take a couple of turns. If I remember correctly, somebody shows up as a political icon later on, even briefly. Almost like Nixon in Where the Buffalo Roam or something like that. It would be cool. It'll be cool when he shows up. I don't want to spoil past this episode because we usually only spoil the ones that we're talking about currently. For my safety. Eugene Bird says, I know nothing about Fargo, but I'm a fan of the presenters and chatty folk here.
Oh,
thank you, Eugene. It's a pleasure. Lemon Pie says, now we need a donation for Peggy's seminar fund. Get Peggy to the seminar. That's exactly what's happening.
Yes.
And greetings.
Yeah, it's not about Peggy getting Peggy Lou to the chapel to get married. It's no, we got to get you to a seminar to be better than everybody, better than you are before. So yeah, pay somebody. What isn't $500? That's for the whole so for the whole seminar. So somebody could use a bunch of words and whisper sweet nothings to tell you how to basically get off your ass and do your shit, rather than paying somebody $500 to tell you what you already know. Basically, it's like, okay, it's con artist. It sounds like just not the type that get in trouble.
What year does this take place?
1979.
Okay, good. I was correct. I want to calculate how much $500 is in 2024 money. It is $2,151.05.
Gosh, that's an expensive seminar, even if it is a few days.
It seems.
Assuming that doesn't include like hotel or anything like that, it's just to be at the seminar. It's a lot of money.
I would assume it's part of the like it'll be at a hotel resort kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if it's for a weekend, it's for self-improvement. You walk away from it being a better version of yourself. Don't you want that? Don't you want that for me?
Here's a good scam for you. You saw The Wolf of Wall Street?
Yes.
Well, you remember how Jordan Belfort teaches his minions how to basically pull off these sales calls in the space of 10 minutes?
Yes.
Well, at the time that the movie came out in 2013, his latest scam was basically teaching average people the same type of stuff, but he spread it across a 9-disc CD set and was charging $1,000 for it, plus $800 seminars to go along with it. And people were actually paying for this.
Yes.
It's like you literally just watch the movie where he basically gives you the basic pointers about how you get to people. And like the final scene in that movie, which is so great when he's like, sell me this pen. And nobody could figure out. And everybody's talking about the greatness of the pen rather than advertising the value of having the pen. Like, you just won $5,000 from Publishers Clearinghouse. All you need to do is sign here. Nobody says that, right? But it's like common sense type stuff. But, I'm going to sell it to you now for, thousands of dollars when I taught it to my, cohorts for, in 10 minutes or that. And that's kind of what I mean. It's like you go to these self-help guru stuff, and it's like, yeah, they read a lot of dictionaries and read a lot of thesauruses to make their vocabulary, erudite and all that. But are they really telling you any valuable information at the end of the day? Or are they just fleecing you for your money?
I don't know. But then again, people go to like McKee, like look at Adaptation when Charlie Kaufman goes to McKee, played by the guy who played Stryker in X-Men 2.
Brian Cox.
That's him. But yeah, same thing. It's like you could buy the book. What do you need the weekend seminar with Robert McKee for?
Well, it's kind of why I'm surprised seminars like that still work today, because it's like you can watch 1 billion of those on YouTube for free.
Yeah,
but
people actually go to TED Talks live.
Right, but plenty of people still make money doing those seminars, even though, again, there's 1 million of them you can watch on YouTube for free. But yeah, I just figured, it's interesting in a show that
Tony Robbins. Are you mad at Tony Robbins?
No, I'm just saying that I thought it was an interesting parallel that in a show that is largely a crime saga about criminals of all types. Having just finished reviewing season 3, which is about a con artist in a bargain basement suit, we have Peggy giving her money to somebody, whoever it is, who seems to be who obviously presents themselves as being much more respectable and giving you basically general information you already own, kind of like those televangelists who con people into giving them obscene amounts of money to do, basically nothing different than your local pastor will do down at the church,
And for free. Well, collection plate. Edge of Time says, step back for your own safety. We can't stop here. This is zombie country. True story. It's good to see Edge of Time. Kat, can you put a price on realizing yourself as a woman?
He says you can't put a price on realizing yourself.
I was asking if you could, because I can't.
But that's another thing, is that I'm still, even having watched this season multiple times, I'm still not exactly clear as to what exactly that means. Realizing Scotty is a woman. Well, I'm sure Terrier has already realized that with his deep face.
Oh, it's true. I did. I tweeted out a pregnant picture of myself. It was really, really disturbing. Eugene, sell me this pen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Megaforce
that's
1.
what I'm talking about. It's like, people go to seminars to have people tell them basically common sense stuff. And it's like, hey. Yes, words.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that, do you have anything else that you wanted to add about the episode?
I mean, not really. I mean, the performances were just, again, really good. I thought it was funny when Lou finally gets back home and he's sitting there with Hank, and they're going to have like dessert, and he's telling Hank about his day. Hank is like, oh yeah, you ran into Mike and the Bathroom Brothers. And he's like, yeah, we drew our guns at each other for a bit, and then we all walked away. And Hank's like, well, you better have a second piece of cake. And he's like, I think you're right. And much like we saw in season 1, Hank ends his night by sitting outside on the porch, with the string, and he's got his rifle there.
Because he was in the Navy.
Then his wife comes out and she's like, what are you doing? He's like, no, I think there might be, something going on, something. We know at some point there's going to be whatever the Sioux Falls incident that they talked about throughout season 1 will come at some point. And given Ben Schmidt even mentioned that in season 1, and we know that Ben Schmidt, having seen him now as a young guy, so we know that's going to come up at some point in this season.
Isn't Sioux Falls is where the seminar is.
Yeah, South Dakota.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Oh, it is where the seminar is it? Yeah.
Yeah. We get to see the seminar, Cat.
Well, I can assure you that, barring any delays, next week when we cover episodes 5 and 6, we will have a lot more to talk about.
Okay, sweet, fantastic. Well, and again, like I enjoyed these episodes, but it's still early season. I'm expecting character building. Yeah. Lemon Pie says, I love Brad Garrettson. So do I. And I don't usually like watching people eat, but he's okay. He's not a gross eater.
Oh, that was funny when he lets Mike touch his hair.
Yeah. I usually carry my own. Agree to what? No, that's the name of the brand. That's the type. But yeah, give it a go. No, I thought that was that. It's not, again, it's those sort of like Coen-esque moments that just build a little bit of character, and he's a squirrely fella, I tell you. Anyway, so yeah, that is about the size of it. Do we need to? How shall we? Or what? Do we have to do anything? Are we?
I don't know if we have to do it. I know it feels like this is a shorter episode than most because we didn't have much to say. But we'll be back, I think, next week around the same time. I had been busy a little earlier this evening, which is why we started a little later. But it all worked out because we're wrapping up at about the same time we usually wrap up. So yeah, next week at either the usual time, 7 or maybe 7:30. Agreed.
Yes.
For that Northern Slick Water.
Yep. Word for our sponsor. And thank you again, Eugene Bird.
Yes.
Really appreciate it. It was kind of a joke when I said, and we're out of time. So I do appreciate your contribution. It is always appreciated. It helps us so we can continue making content, and hopefully some of it lasts longer than an hour. But thank you very much. Lemon Pie, thank you for showing up. It's always a pleasure. Edge of Time, you're beautiful. And I think that until next week, we should be on time again.
Yes, we should be. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, then someone should say, "You betcha."
Yeah, you betcha. Yeah.